There are people around us who are in need of the basics, something like clothing. We want to create an opportunity to help and support those people. So we are launching Street Store 2021. Over the next few weeks, we want to ask you to bring clothing to the church. It might be some of those old clothes that you don't use anymore and they are in good condition, or you might want to bless someone with something new. On the 9th of June, we will then pack and sort the clothing, and on the 19th of June, we will have the official Street Store. You can go onto our website or our Facebook page, follow the Church Suite link and sign up for these events. Let's get together as city changers and impact our community.
We were waiting without hope, without light, till from heaven you came running. There was mercy in your eyes to fulfill the law and prophets. To a virgin came the word from a throne of endless glory to a cradle in the dirt. To reveal the kingdom coming and to reconcile the lost, to redeem the whole creation. You did not despise the cross, for even in your suffering you saw to the other side, knowing this was our salvation. Jesus, for our sake you died. Till the stone was moved for good, for the Lamb had conquered death, and the dead rose from their tombs, and the angels stood in awe, for the souls of who come to the Father are restored, and the Church of Christ was born. Then the Spirit lit the flame. Now the gospel's shall not kneel, shall not fade. By His blood and in His name, in
Hello and welcome, ladies and gents. Today we kick off a brand new series, As Kings Rule. I don't know about you, but occasionally in my life I've had this desire, this urge, this longing for more. More intimacy, more of God's goodness, more of Him made manifest in the world, just more. And in this journey with God, in my life, it has taken different shapes and forms, different definitions, ways that I've tried to understand it. Abundance, prosperity, fullness of life, the unforced rhythms of grace. And yet somehow I don't feel like that encapsulates everything that this desire hopes to express. And so in this new series of sermons, we explore what it means to rule as kings. Because God has given us all authority in Christ, and we're expected to rule with that. And I don't know about you, but in my life, I haven't seen the rulership. I haven't seen the full expression of the authority that God has given me in my life. And the question I'm confronted with is, why is that? What is it that God has given us, made available to us, that we have yet to understand and yet to step into? And what are the things that we need to discover about God's design that allows us to step into those spaces? And so really the series explores what is the rhythms of intimacy that positions us appropriately in our relationship with God, so that we can understand our authority as sons, the source of that authority and how that authority expresses itself. And finally, we want to explore the nature of that impact. Because perhaps the word that we're trying to define is destiny. The thing that I am uniquely designed for, that finds expression in my relationship with God, that allows me to impact the world in a way that I am uniquely designed to do. And if that one thing is left undone, the world is poorer for it. And there is something that God deposited in me. There's a God color that is in me that has not yet found expression, that the world has not seen because I have not been able to show it to them. And so really we want to dive into that and say, God, what is it? What is the appropriate context for this to find expression? And what does that mean in our lives? There's this incredible story about Jesus going to visit two of his good friends. And that is the basis for today's session. A new rhythm. What is the rhythm in our relationship with Christ that we wish to explore? And this takes place when Jesus visits Martha and Mary. It's two good friends of his. He's also friends with their brother Lazarus, who later dies, and Jesus intervenes in an incredible way. But in this particular interaction, Martha and Mary are playing two very different roles. And as you would expect, Martha is the older sister, and they have a visitor who is a friend, certainly, but he's still a visitor in her house. And so she has this social obligation, she has this responsibility to prepare a meal, to make sure the place is appealing and clean and kept. And so she's busy in the kitchen. But her sister Mary, the younger one, isn't helping, not a little bit. Because she's sitting at Jesus' feet and she's listening to the stories that he's telling. And Martha is kind of irritated. It's a thing that it's boiling beneath the surface. And she's keeping her mouth shut and she's doing the things that she needs to do. But there's just something that's irking her about the situation. Because how is it that this teacher who understands so much about the love of God is just comfortable to let the situation play out? Why isn't he addressing Mary and saying, hey, help your sister. She's doing the thing she's supposed to be doing. Why are you letting her do this alone? And so Martha is kind of struggling with this thing internally while all of this is going down, until the pot boils over. And she can no longer contain this frustration that she's feeling. And she decides to talk to Jesus about this thing that she feels inside. And she's like, why aren't you seeing this? And why aren't you addressing it? Why are you allowing my sister to sit and listen to you and not help me out? And there's this incredible response. Jesus says, Martha, Martha, you are troubled by many things, but only one thing is necessary. Mary has chosen the good path. This plays out in Luke chapter 10. And it's a little bit confrontational, I think. For those of us who tend to be the doers, who tend to make sure everything is in order, for us this is almost offensive. It's like, what do you mean I'm troubled by many things? These things are appropriate and they're expected and someone must do them. But see, that's not what Jesus was getting at. There's something about his interaction with Mary that gives us a clue about a new rhythm that Jesus is calling us into. Because he says, Martha, you're troubled by the things you must do instead of where you must be. And sometimes in our own lives we get so distracted by the work in the kitchen that we miss what Jesus is saying in the living room. And this is exactly what's happening in this interaction. Jesus is saying, Martha, yes, all of those things are important, but they are never more important than intimacy with me. Martin Luther has this brilliant way to explain it. He gets asked, how much do you pray? And he says, I pray mostly 1 hour, 2 hours a day, but on especially busy days, I pray 3. It's just this brilliant way to shape it into the appropriate context, because in our minds, what often happens is when we get busy, when we have these tasks and these responsibilities that start stacking up, the first 2 things that go is we start to cut down on lower priorities and we start to cut down on our time with God because we just feel there's so much to do. And Jesus is just reframing that entire thing and he's saying, but the most important thing is not what you do for me. It's that you engage me in relationship. And so there's this beautiful experience where God says, I want to call you into intimacy. There is a new rhythm I want you to discover. Work is not the point. Intimacy is the point. Because as Martin Luther discovered, when I have the appropriate context for all the work I must do, I will get through it more quickly. Because I'm no longer doing it from the sweat of my own brow. I've discovered the unforced rhythms of grace. And so these things flow naturally from me. And if we can position ourselves in that place, there's something beautiful that comes from that. So the question is how? The question is, how do we even understand that? Because we've been taught and raised in a particular way. We must work hard, we must be dedicated and committed, and all those things are still true. The question is just, what is the worldview? It is the perspective from which we approach the work that changes whether we do it from force or from a response to love. In the Jewish culture, there's this incredible idea about Jesus as the shepherd. We see that in Psalm 23. And if we think about some of the shepherds in the desert, because most of Israel is a desert, and what these shepherds do is they walk with their sheep, but the sheep are fully reliant on the shepherd. All they really want is food and water and place to sleep and safety so that lions don't eat them. But they're fully dependent on the provision of the shepherd for those things, for their safety and their food. But they're walking through a desert, and so food is not easy to find. It's these little patches of grass that grow close to the rocks because moisture gets trapped there. But you see, the shepherd knows where these fields of grass are. The sheep don't. And so the sheep learn to distinguish the voice of the shepherd. They get to understand that the shepherd has plans to prosper them and not to harm them. And so when he calls, they follow because they know where he is taking them. There are green pastures. There is food to eat. And in that desert season of your life, perhaps you've gone through a desert season within your health or your business or retrenchments or family relationships or tensions. And it feels like there are desert seasons, and yet there's this good shepherd that takes us to the places where we have food and safety and shelter. The question is, what happens when we enter the promised land? What happens when we enter the season of abundance? Suddenly, we are in Psalm 23. Like a good shepherd, he's leading us to green pastures, to still restful waters that refresh and restore our life. So now it's no longer as necessary for us to follow the voice of the shepherd because there are green pastures all around us. And so we kind of get distracted and we start feeding in this direction and we just kind of follow our noses. And when we find ourselves, we no longer know where the shepherd is at. But you know, he's a good shepherd. He will leave the 99 to go look for the one. But it is after our desert season, when we come into our abundance, that this becomes a risk, because our needs are provided for. And we forget how desperately we need intimacy with the shepherd. And this is where Jesus just reframes this for Martha. He says, but Mary has chosen the good path, because she realizes that intimacy with me is the starting place for a healthy relationship. And it is the starting place for this more that we long for, this destiny, this desire, this thing that we have that is intangible, that we know we are called to achieve, but we don't know how. There's another beautiful place to understand this, I think, practically. How does this find expression? And if we go to Psalm 1, it starts with, blessed is the man. Now that's a good place to start, isn't it? Blessed is the man. This is the blessing we're after. It's the fullness of life that I wish to discover and live into. As Jesus said, I have come that you may have life, and life in abundance. And so Psalm 1 says, blessed is the man. So this to me sounds like, hey, he's going to tell us where the abundance is at. But then he first goes into, blessed is the man who does not. And so he says, if we are to enter this abundance, first we must understand what it's not. And Psalm 1 frames that so nicely. He says, do not walk, do not stand, do not sit. There's a progression in this. He says, if we first walk in a place that exposes us, eventually we end up sitting there. And what those three things refer to is, the walking is how we think. Do not walk in the counsel of the ungodly. Because if we do not have the ability to discern the truth of God, and discern who He is and what His opinion is over our lives, it's very difficult for us to distinguish the quality of the counsel we receive. And so we don't know that we're following the counsel of the ungodly, because we have no appropriate measure to distinguish whether it is ungodly or not. And so the first place this starts, this negative spiral starts, is by walking in that counsel of ungodly, because we cannot discern it properly. And then we end up standing in the path of sinners. So now it's no longer what we think, but our behavior. It's about what we do. We are now standing in the path of sinners. And so this thing has started to degrade from a thinking to an activity, because now we conduct ourselves in accordance with the counsel that we've received. And we think it is appropriate because we do not recognize its ungodly nature. And by interacting with that and responding to that, we are actually now standing in the path of sin, being out of alignment with God's opinion over our lives. And finally, we get comfortable. Finally, we sit in the seat of the scorners, the guys who judge and condemn and proclaim against those who are doing good, because they have become so negative and they've become so passive that all they can do is give comment. And so we start with the walking and the inability to distinguish, and then we move to the doing, the activity, the responding to that counsel. And finally, we end up belonging to. Because you see, we've now surrounded ourselves with people who think the way that we think, and who act the way that we act. And we end up belonging to this group, and our identity is now formed by the place in which we sit. And he says, do not do these three things. But you see, they don't start with sitting. They start with walking. And then he flips the script and he says, but blessed is the man who does the following. He meditates on the precepts and the principles of God. See, when God gets involved, thinking is not the first point. Because the definition of the godly man is not about how he thinks, but about who he belongs to. The precepts and the principles of God is to live by every word that comes from the mouth of the Father. Which means it refers to intimacy. It refers to sitting at Jesus' feet as Martha did, because she has chosen the good portion. And by sitting at Jesus' feet, I learn to function in the unforced rhythms of grace. I hear what Christ's opinion is over my life. I hear what He thinks about situations. And all of a sudden, when I hear other counsel, I can distinguish that it is in fact ungodly, only because I know what Christ has said. And if this is contradicting to that, I will no longer buy into it. And so intimacy becomes that critical place. To sit at the feet of Jesus becomes the place that protects us from the things that we cannot do if we are to achieve abundance and if we are to go on towards the destiny to which God has called us. But you see, the beautiful thing about this is it comes with a promise. Just after this one simple verse, you see, there are 3 things we shouldn't do. Here's only one thing we need to do: sit at the feet of Jesus. And then what is the promise with that? He goes on to say, he shall be like a tree. This man who meditates on the word of God, he shall be like a tree. Okay, that's wonderful. What kind of tree is this? It's a tree planted by the rivers of water. See, it's positional. It's about where the tree is planted. And because the tree is next to the river of the fullness of the truth of Christ, he's always next to water. And there is always nutrients available for this tree to flourish. And so as a result, the consequences are that his leaf does not wither. No matter the season, he's always green. It's an evergreen tree because there's always enough water and nutrients around him. He will bear fruit in his season. Not always, because fruits are dependent on what kind of tree you are. But in the season that you're meant to bear fruit, you will bear fruit. And whatever you do will prosper. Now if we take this back to that urge, that longing that you have for more, is this not what the unforced rhythms of grace look like? If I discover that in fact I am a tree, and I've been trying to be something else, but I am a tree. I don't have to do, I don't have to move, I don't have to focus on pushing out fruit and getting stuff done. I just have to position myself at the feet of Jesus. And by doing that, I will discover this abundance because it just speaks to everything I am and everything I was designed to be. And by being in this place, I cannot help but be evergreen and bear fruit in my season and prosper in everything that I do. Not because of my effort, not because of my education or my networks or my relationships or my money, but because of my intimate relationship with Christ. And when we discover this one thing, and when we understand that all our authority is dependent on the fact that we live in intimate relationship with Christ, for we have cast our burdens unto Jesus, and we have cast off everything that so easily ensnares us so that we can run with endurance the race, seated at the right hand of Christ in heavenly places. And then we can discover the fullness of our destiny. So I hope this really blesses you. And in the next couple of weeks, next week we'll explore what it means to discover our sonship and what is the source of our authority and what is this authority meant for. And in the final week, we'll explore the impact that this has on the world and how our achieving our destiny is not only good for us and the necessary expression of God's love for us, but also so desperately needed in the world around us. May you be blessed.